Sunday's lesson, Cain and Abel. What questions or concerns come to mind when you think of this story? Have you ever thought, why did Cain do what he did? I mean, here we are, first generation. Garden of Eden, as I understand it, if you value Ellen White's insights, was still on the earth at the time. Angels, and in fact, the Bible talks about the angels with the flaming swords that were still there barring the way to the tree of life. So they could see it, but they couldn't access it. Remember this? They've got Adam and Eve to tell them their first-hand account of their journeying and walking with God in Eden before sin. What would cause the first child of Adam and Eve to become a murderer and turn against Abel? What do you think? Was Cain tender towards God or hardened against God? Cain. Tender toward God or hardened? From the biblical story, how does he respond? He was hardened. Yes. Is it possible that Cain came to worship his sacrifice with an assumption about God, operating in his mind, a belief about God that was false? What did Cain do for a living? He was a farmer. And what happened to the ground after sin? It was cursed.
For his sake.
Genesis 3:17-19. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you eat of it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. And by the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground from which you were taken, for dust you are, and dust you will return. Did Cain understand this statement by God? That was God speaking, by the way. As many do today, God is an inflictor of curses. God is using his power to make our lives harder. God is laying a burden on our shoulders. Yes, Adam and Eve, my parents, disobeyed, and God cursed them for it. And therefore, Cain views God as an untrustworthy being, a powerful being to be sure, but one who's not worthy of his trust, because if you don't do what he says, he'll punish you. Coercive pressure. If you don't think that leads to rebellion, try it on your spouse. Sweetie, I love you. But if you don't love me, while you're sleeping, I will light you on fire. I will. It's only because I love you that I torture you this way. Seriously, if you were to threaten your spouse in any way, I will take your checkbook from you. If you go to the grocery store and spend more than your allowed amount, I've given you $50. If you spend $51, you lose your checkbook for the month. Try that on your spouse. See what happens. I promise you, rebellion will be instilled. It's a law, it's a design law of how God constructed reality. Is it possible Cain rebelled because he believed the lie? He misinterpreted what's happening and believed Satan's lie that God is the source of curses, as many Christians teach today. Well, this is First Spirit of Prophecy, page 54. Cain and Abel, the sons of Adam, were very unlike in character. Abel feared God. Cain cherished rebellious feelings and murmured against God because of the curse pronounced upon Adam, and because the ground was cursed for his sin. So something about the curse, Cain didn't sit well with Cain. Those who oppose what we teach in this class hold the same view. When I was at the GC, there was two people that were the most prominent in working the crowd against our ministry. One went around handing out cards telling them that I teach heresy and go to a website where he posted a big blog about it. Another came back several times to have dialogue. I had dialogue with both of them. And both of them used examples from Genesis where God punished the sin. Because after Eden, he cursed the ground. He threw them out of the garden. He inflicted this on them as punishment. This is what they said. This is how rebellion began in heaven. By Satan getting angels to believe that if you step out of line, God will use his power to punish you. But if you understand design law, you understand that God, in saying cursed is the ground, did not inflict anything. He simply diagnosed and pronounced the reality of Earth's condition now infected with Satan's principles. If you're struggling with that, here's an Ellen White quote for you. Second lesson messages 288. Christ never planted the seeds of death in the system. Satan planted these seeds when he tempted Adam to eat of the tree of knowledge, which meant disobedience to God. Not one noxious plant was placed in the Lord's great garden, but after Adam and Eve sinned, poisonous herbs sprang up. In the parable of the sower, the question was asked the master, "Didst not thou sow good seed in the field? From where then has the tares come?" The master answered, "An enemy has done this. All tares are sown by the evil one. Every noxious herb is of his sowing, and by his ingenious methods of amalgamation he has corrupted the earth with his tares." God did not curse the ground. But if you have this view, God is the source of curses. He'll punish you if you step out of line. This does not lead to love and trust. It leads to rebellion. I'm going to suggest that it was this distortion in Cain's mind that hardened his heart against God. How many religious people through history, even today, are caught in the same trap? Same trap. Here's another quote from one of the founders of our church. This is out of Signs of the Times, December 23, 1886. "These two brothers, Cain and Abel, represent the whole human family. They were both tested on the point of obedience, and all would be tested as they were. Abel bore the proving of God. He revealed the gold of a righteous character, the principles of true godliness. But Cain's rebellion had not a good foundation. It rested upon human merit. He brought to God something in which he had a personal interest, the fruits of the ground, which had been cultivated by his toil, and he presented his offering as a favor done to God, through which he expected to secure the divine approval." Do you notice Cain has a works-oriented religion? Because he didn't trust God. This is why. We must pay him. We must bribe him. We must do something for him. He's not trustworthy. He doesn't have good intentions in his heart naturally. We must bring something to him that will influence him to look upon us favorably. Continuing on with the same article. In the case of Cain and Abel, we have a type of two classes that will exist in the world to the close of time. And this type is worthy of close study. There is a marked difference in the characters of the two brothers, and the same difference is seen in the human family today. Cain represents those who carry out the principles and works of Satan by worshiping God in a way of their own choosing. Notice, she didn't say carry out the works of Satan by rejecting God and becoming agnostics and atheists and not believing in God. She says carry out the work of Satan by worshiping God in a way of their own choosing. These are worshiping people. These are religious people. We miss this. I think one of Satan's strategies is to look at the people who have rejected God and then to criticize them and throw stones. But you will find many of the people who have rejected God have rejected Satan's distortion about God. And they've actually moved closer to God by rejecting that lie than had they stayed and continued to worship in a corrupt system. Yes?
I always got in the story of Cain and Abel, and wondering how many others did, the message that it was because Cain brought the wrong gift to God.
Yes, this is why? Because it's through that lens of, and we're going to get to this when we get to Jacob, because we're going to talk about this idea, God is very particular. He gives you his exact descriptions of what you must do. If you deviate from that like Cain did, then you must be punished, like Cain was. We're going to come to that when we get to Jacob in our lesson today, because Jacob, if you remember how Jacob handled his life, he doesn't exactly follow God's guidance and instructions for most of his early years, but God didn't punish him for it.
So it's works oriented. If you don't do it just right, the right thing.
Exactly. Continuing on with the quote. Like the leader whom they follow, which is Satan, who that she's talking about here, they are willing to render partial obedience, but not entire submission to God. Man, in the pride of his heart, would like to believe that he can confer some favor upon God, that our Heavenly Father may be the receiver and not always the giver. But God will not be bribed. Notice how understanding design law, how reality functions. God is the source of all good, all righteous, all life, all energy, all matter, all time, all space. God is the source. He's constantly giving of himself. It flows outward from God. We receive the blessings of everything. The air we breathe is because God created air. The water we drink is because God created water. The life that we have is because God has created us to live. And everything then flows back to God in praise and adoration and loving acceptance and so forth and so on. But this view that Satan has is that actually we can confer some favor on God, that he becomes the receiver, that we have to give him something, but God will not be bribed. What about the theology you were raised with? Yes, we were taught we have nothing in ourselves that we can come to God and merit his mercy and grace. Because of all of our righteousness is filthy rags. But I know there is something we can go to God and it will please him and it will influence his angry wrath to be turned aside. He won't look at us with rage. Instead, he will be gracious to us. I know we can offer him the blood of his son. So when he sends his son to us, all we have to do to get in God's good graces, if we really want to be in God's good graces, is we have to kill his son. And if we kill his son, then he'll be happy with us. This is penal substitution theology. We have nothing to give, so we send his son, we kill his son, offer him his perfect son's blood. Now he's appeased. His anger is turned away. His wrath has been satisfied. Does any part of you go, wait a second, that is just crazy talk? Yes, because it's based on the human law construct. It's not based on design law. We are dead in our trespass and sin. We need to be set right. We need to be restored. We need to have the law written in our heart and mind. We need to be recreated in the inner man. We need to be won back to trust. The work of salvation is changing sinners, not changing God. The Cain class of worshipers, finishing this quote, includes by far the largest number for every false religion that has ever been invented, has been based on the Cain principle. Cain actually thought God would be grateful to him. I've worked so hard. I've worked these fields. I've produced these fruits. I'm bringing it to you, Lord. And after the curse you put on it, look at the amazing fruit that I was able to bring forth after the curse you put here. You should be very thankful. I worked so hard in this field for you. Yeah. Yes.
We were talking this morning, Joel and I, about today is supposed to be like a day of prayer, church-wide, NAD, day of prayer. We talk about what does that mean. I really believe that often we approach God with the intent of changing him. If we get together, if we pray, if we have a vigil, if we are really sincere, then we'll get him talked over to what we're really pushing for. And really we need to come to him as asking him to change us. And that's the same thing with Cain.
Well said.
He came trying to say, okay, God, look, this is good, right? And God really wanted to change his life.
We talked about this a couple weeks ago. We talked about the way things are expressed. The lesson, use the phraseology, we rest secure on the promises of God. Do we rest secure on the promises of God? Do we rest secure in the God who made promises? Do we rest secure in the blood of the Lamb or the Lamb who shed his blood? Do we rest secure in the righteousness, the robe of Christ's righteousness, or Christ who is righteous? And you say, I'm playing word games. No. The first way you say it makes those things into commodities that we can use in our vending machine. We can go to God with the promise. I've seen this happen over and over. God, you've promised. I'm claiming the promise, God. You've written it. You've promised it. Now you must do it. It's almost like we use the promises of God like pagan cult worshipers use their incantations. If I say the incantation the right way, I can control the spirit. If I say the promise in the right way, God has to do what I want him to do.
Well, if we have more numbers saying the incantation.
Yeah, or we have to put our prayer list out and get more and more people, then he'll really be influenced to do what we want. So I think now, I'm not diminishing the promises of God by any means. No, they're important to us. We gain peace and strength from the promises of God. We can have security. But the promises is for our confidence in him, not to turn them around on him and put him in the vending machine of our prayers and say, God, you promised, now you've got to do it. The lesson is moving into Monday's lesson into the flood. We're looking at a lot of the Old Testament early stuff.